You'll want to see Sana Lathan at her best and possibly end up with a non-dusty man? You'll have to see to find out. The movie begins at a wedding. Just as the couple is about to kiss, sirens blare and the guests panic, fleeing while the bride stands frozen. An alarm clock rings. It was only Kenya's dream. She wakes up irritated as the radio blathers about Valentine's Day. She surveys her overgrown backyard, scrolls through her packed schedule, then heads out for a jog, only to get annoyed watching couples kissing. Your girl's single and bitter AF. At work, Leah complains about wedding dress options. Kenya tells her to wear whatever she loves, but Leah shifts the spotlight, insisting Kenya needs to marry next. Kenya shuts her down, saying she doesn't do blind dates. Leah presses, mentioning Brian, tall, attractive, an architect, and newly single. Kenya refuses. In a meeting, Kenya introduces herself to Jack Pino, who pointedly asks if they're waiting for someone else, a dig laced with sexism and racism. Kenya calmly reminds him she's the senior manager. He scoffs. This fugly, bald-headed white man about to get slapped. That evening, Kenya dines with her girlfriends. They debate the statistic that 42.4% of black women never marry. Kenya pushes back, noting that means 57.6% do. She rejects the victim narrative that being single is a bad thing, insisting she still believes in finding a good man. She rattles off her checklist for the ideal black man, drawing playful jabs about her ex Rashid. Nedra said she would have gone to mosques for the Muslim Rashid because he was fine. Suzette references Dr. LaWanda Phillips' mantra, stop blocking abundance and let go, let flow. Cheryl cheers to that. Back home, Kenya finds a voicemail from Rashid saying he's getting married. Her father then calls to wish her a happy Valentine's Day. The next morning, Kenya runs into Dr. Brockton. She politely greets him while sizing up his questionable friends, who all looks thirsty for her even though they're married. So she ducks into Starbucks to escape the thirsty triflers. She shows up for the blind date, scanning the room for black men. Instead, Brian approaches. Tall, handsome, newly single, but white. Though he's kind, Kenya instinctively puts on a hardened version of her black identity to distance herself. As they sit down, Brian quickly notices Kenya's discomfort. She distracts herself by chatting with strangers until he asks if she's ever been on a blind date. Kenya admits it's her first, saying she only agreed because her friends urged her to be more open. Brian picks up on her hesitation about dating white men, and she cuts the date short, claiming she has work to do. Nowadays, you gotta sniff out the red hat wearers, and avoiding mayonnaise is just easier. At Leah's engagement party, Kenya vents to Cheryl about Leah's setup with Brian. While Cheryl flirts with the chefs at the grill, Kenya admires the landscaping. Leah's mother, Winnie, compliments her and asks if Kenya needs help with her new backyard. Kenya demurs, but Winnie insists on introducing her to the landscape architect, Brian. Seeing Kenya's discomfort, Brian simply hands her his card and walks away. Brian later visits Kenya's home for a site inspection, bringing along his dog Max. Kenya disapproves of having him inside, not wanting dog hair in her house. In the backyard, Brian shares ideas Kenya finds appealing. He invites her to see one of his finished projects. Though she protests, he convinces her, and she hops onto his truck. But I'm pretty sure that's not the only thing she finna hop on. They stop at a community garden where Brian drops off plants for Maria. She teases him about his breakup with Penelope and calls Kenya cute. Kenya panics when she thinks a spider got in her hair, and Brian calms her down. Back in the truck, he teases her about hating both spiders and dogs. He offers to draft a proposal for her backyard, then drops her home. At work, Kenya learns from Edwin that she's being considered for partner. She's thrilled and later receives a playful gift from Brian, Charlotte's Web with Kenya, written in place of Charlotte. The next day, while Brian and his crew work on her garden, Max runs into the living room, startling Kenya and causing her to spill the lattes she'd made for them. Annoyed, she shoos Max away. Brian notices her stress, especially since she's in a suit on a Saturday. Kenya explains she's swamped, aiming for the partner role. He congratulates her, promising the garden will be ready for a celebratory housewarming, then thanks her for the coffee and gets back to work. Kenya spies on Brian from the window, admiring his body, looking at every single one of his crevices she finna explore. Until her brother Nelson startles her. He introduces his girlfriend, the Black Stacy Dash, and teases Kenya about suddenly landscaping. When she introduces Brian, Nelson rudely shrugs him off and stirs gossip about her skiing the slopes. Kenya clarifies it was just a blind date, but Nelson keeps pressing, offering unsolicited dating advice that irritates her. At the community garden, Brian shows Kenya different plants. She notices his passion and asks how he got into it. He explains his dad inspired him, and caring for plants became his calling. You can pollinate this flower all you want. That evening, Kenya joins her family for her mother's birthday. Nelson arrives with yet another girlfriend. Their mother, Joyce, brags about the family. Her husband, Edmund, the neurosurgeon, Kenya's soon-to-be partner, and Nelson supposedly working in the legal department at 20th Century Fox. During a performance, Nelson tattles to their mom about Kenya's white guy. Kenya insists it was only a blind date and he's just her landscaper. As two dancers perform a sensual diasporic piece, Kenya grows uneasy, reflecting on her situation. Later at home, she finds Brian still working in her garden. She compliments his progress, pets Max for the first time, then orders takeout and invites Brian to eat with her. Over dinner, Brian critiques her millennial beige interiors as safe and impersonal. Kenya explains her mother always dismissed color as vulgar and admits she doesn't feel bold enough. Brian counters that she doesn't take time to know herself and works too hard. He calls out her aversion to white men. She insists it's preference, not prejudice. When she asks his type, he says women are women. He's dated across races. She calls him a player, but he insists he's just a gardener, making things grow. Since he's a gardener, then he must use a lot of hose. The next day, Brian invites Kenya on a hike. She declines because black people don't hike, so he flips a coin. She loses and reluctantly joins. She complains the whole way up, and at the summit, rain forces them to take cover. Sitting close, Brian wraps his arm around her, and they kiss. But Kenya pulls back. After dropping her off, Brian surprises her at the door, rushing inside. They kiss passionately and give in to their attraction. So he tends to her flower and pollinates it, twice. After sleeping together, Brian asks about Kenya's name. She explains she was born in Kenya, and as a child with severe asthma, was kept sheltered. He strokes her face, calling her adorable, but then brings up her weave, saying he'd like to see her natural hair. Offended, she throws him out and fires him as her landscaper. The next day, Kenya tells her girlfriends what happened. The girls wonder if he got a big thing-a-ling, and she confirms. However, she doesn't want it to be serious. They reassure her she doesn't have to marry him. Just let it flow. Unexpectedly, she visits her hairdresser to remove her weave. When Brian returns to collect his tools, he notices the change and calls her beautiful. As he leaves, Kenya stops him. Their romance resumes. He waters her thirsty garden with his big hose. In bed, he paints her toenails. They laugh, cook, paint walls, and play together while he gardens. Soon they're inseparable. While cooking together, Kenya says she can't believe white people be French kissing their dogs. One night at a comedy club, a comedian jokes about interracial dating, leaving Kenya and Brian uneasy. Cheryl joins them and insists Kenya own her happiness. She gives Kenya a colorful dress, and they dance. Meanwhile, Walter corners Brian and says they're very protective over Kenya, which Brian shrugs off. The comedian later joins their table, cracking more racial jokes, and Kenya and Brian force awkward laughs. The next day, Kenya faces Jack Pino, the racist client, who treats her white assistant with more trust. She firmly reminds him she's there to protect his deal. Edwin briefly steps in, but when Jack asks him to stay, Edwin refuses, affirming that Kenya can handle it. Jack insists Edwin follow up later anyway. At home, Kenya receives an invitation to the Black Society Cotillion, an event her mother has always valued, and sighs. In the backyard, Brian greets her with the finished garden, stunning her. As they cuddle, he asks about her day. She admits she's tired of dealing with black tax, having to work twice as hard just to be seen as equal. Amen. At Kenya's housewarming, Brian greets Walter at the grill, but gets his usual cold shoulder. He joins Kenya as Leah arrives, delighted by their development. Kenya reunites with her girlfriends, who tease her about her new era, while Brian becomes the butt of jokes. When Kenya's parents arrive, she introduces them to Brian. Her mother disapproves, making snide comments about getting rid of her weave before heading inside. Kenya's father chats politely with Brian, while her mother confronts Kenya about looking bohemian. Nelson arrives with yet another girlfriend, and, uninvited, his law school mentor, Mark Harper. Mark presents Kenya with an orchid, says he's new in town and looking to buy property, and asks if she can help him next week. Kenya brushes it off, but later her mother suggests Mark is perfect for her.
Ciao.
If Mark is played by Blair, run for the hills, girl. Before leaving, she makes a snide remark about Brian's garden, then pointedly asks if Kenya got her cotillion invite. Kenya avoids the topic. Afterward, Brian asks what that was about, and Kenya shows him her debutante photos, explaining the cotillion tradition. She considers skipping it, but Brian insists they should go, saying he's a good dancer. Kenya doesn't seem to be comfortable bringing a mayonnaise to the party. The next day, Edwin apologizes for Jack Pino's behavior, praising Kenya's professionalism. That evening, Kenya vents about it to Brian, but he asks for a break from the constant race talk. Kenya says there's no day off for her because she's constantly reminded on the daily that she's a black woman. Her clients would rather trust the white assistant responsible for making coffee than her. Brian suggests maybe their relationship won't work. Kenya agrees. Dump that sorry Oz because this seems to be his first time dating a black woman. Kenya later accompanies Mark to view a property. The broker mistakenly calls her Mrs. Harper, and Mark plays along, saying she has more questions and they'll follow up tomorrow. At dinner, they bond over shared experiences with black tax at work. Mark admits he often works weekends as he's also up for partner. Kenya relates. Then he admits he'd like to spend more time with her and asks if she's seeing anyone. She says no, which pleases his coochie. A few days later, Kenya's mom nags her about the cotillion, annoying her. She hears barking, Max, and then Brian shows up unannounced. Kenya isn't happy, saying he should have called after 2 weeks of silence. Brian admits he felt stupid for not listening before, apologizes, and says he loves her. Kenya walks away, admits she's seeing someone else. Brian guesses he's a black, suit and tie guy, and leaves with Max, declining her offer to pay him back. The next day, Mark takes Kenya golfing, and he looks like he's trying to thrust her. Then they sit working on laptops. He says what they have is great, but she's visibly uneasy. At Leah's wedding, Kenya arrives with Mark, but sees Brian with Penelope. After an awkward exchange, Kenya has a panic attack, her friends trying to calm her and reminding her Mark is her dream guy. Suzette scolds her, Kenya snaps back, and Nedra loudly jokes about taking Mark, disrupting the ceremony. Later at the McQueen's Sunday dinner, Joyce gushes about Mark's parents' 45-year marriage, while Nelson parades another new girlfriend. Mark hints at a future with Kenya, thrilling Joyce, but this makes Kenya uncomfortable. She knows that Blair Underwood stays trifling. On the ride home, Mark offends her by saying he prefers her with long hair. When he leans in to kiss her, she pulls away. He offers patience, even his guest room, but Kenya finally tells him she can't see him anymore and drives off in tears. Cheryl and Walter comfort Kenya as she vents about Mark, who seemed perfect but lacked spark. Cheryl reminds her to trust her instincts, while Walter admits he once doubted Brian, but says it's about connection, not race. Cheryl asks if Brian makes her feel loved, planting a seed in Kenya's mind. At the Pinot Group board meeting, Kenya advises against acquiring net worth consolidated, showing integrity despite pressure. Though Jack is displeased, Edwin commends her judgment and makes her partner. Overjoyed, she requests 1 weekend off every month. At the cotillion, Cheryl announces her engagement and urges Kenya to remember their talk. The cotillion starts, and this is where the rich black folks go. As they announce each girl, they also announce the parents' careers. But Kenya drinks too much, mocks the superficiality of the tradition, and embarrasses Joyce, who lashes out. Kenya storms off where her father comforts her, sharing how he and Joyce once defied her parents for love. He urges her to follow her heart, reminding her Brian is just white, not a Martian. Inspired, Kenya rushes to find wrinkly Brian. At the community garden, she confesses she wants a life with him, that her dreams have changed. Brian admits he still loves her, and they reconcile. Kenya then brings him to the cotillion, where he appears in mariachi attire and they dance, embraced by family and friends. The story ends with their wedding, full of joy, love, and unity. What did y'all think of this one? Cutesy or romance horror?
Hey, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe now and turn on the notification because YouTube isn't recommending my videos. And if you'd like to watch more foolishness, click here or here.